The wind on Thalnari did not just blow, it scoured. It was a relentless, heat-heavy breath that tasted of oxidized copper and ancient, pulverized bone. Cade Rowan pulled his scarf tighter around his face, though it did little to filter out the fine, ruddy grit that seemed to inhabit the air itself. He adjusted the strap of his spectral scanner, feeling the weight of the durasteel casing dig into a callus on his shoulder that had been there for 10 years. 10 years of digging up the garbage of dead civilization so the Galactic Council could catalog it, tax it, and lock it away in a vault where the light of a sun would never touch it again. He stood on the ridge of the excavation site, looking down into the bowl of the valley. Below, illuminated by the harsh floodlight glare of the portable fusion lamps, stood the reason he had been dragged halfway across the sector to this god-forsaken rock. The locals called it the Weeping Saint. The initial survey reports from the university simply labeled it Artifact 990 Alpha. It was a statue, or at least, that was what Cade had been told. It stood perfectly upright in the center of a basalt dais, surrounded by the crumbled remains of what might have been a temple or a prison. The figure was female, carved or perhaps grown from a single block of translucent violet-hued crystal. It was exquisite work, the kind that made modern nanofabrication look like finger painting. Every fold of her robe was rendered with fluid precision, catching the light and trapping it deep within the mineral structure. Her face was turned slightly upward, eyes closed, lips parted in a silent gasp of sorrow or perhaps ecstasy. Cade slid down the scree slope, his boots crunching loudly in the unnatural quiet of the dig site. The rest of the crew had packed up hours ago, retreating to the climate-controlled habitat modules 3 miles west to drink synthesized beer and complain about the hazard pay. Cade had stayed behind. He usually did. He preferred the company of the dead. They expected less from him. He reached the base of the dais and powered on his scanner. The device hummed, a low vibration that made his teeth ache. Scan for structural decay. Scan for microfractures. Tag it, bag it, ship it. He ran the sensor wand over the hem of the crystal robe. The readout on his wrist display flickered green. Structural integrity at 100%. No degradation, no erosion. It was impossible. According to the carbon dating of the surrounding strata, this layer was nearly 1,000 years old. 990 years, to be precise. Nothing survived 9 centuries on Thalnari without being sandblasted into oblivion. A shadow detached itself from the pillars near the perimeter. Cade flinched, his hand dropping instinctively to the stun baton at his belt, before he recognized the hunched silhouette of old Joran, the site's local guide. The old man was a Thalnari native, his skin the texture of dried leather, his eyes milky with cataracts from the twin suns. "You should not be here this late. Restorer," Joran rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "The moons are rising. I have a job to do." "Joran," Cade said, relaxing his grip on the baton. "The Authority wants a full subsurface schematic by tomorrow morning. If I don't get it, I don't get paid. And if I don't get paid, I can't buy a ticket off this dustball." Joran stepped closer, leaning on his staff. He gestured with a gnarled hand toward the violet figure. "She is not a thing to be measured. My people say she watches. They say the crystal is not a cage, but a shield." Cade snorted, turning back to the statue. He was used to local superstition. On Xylos, they said the pots he dug up contained ghosts. On Verna Prime, they said the soil was the ashes of gods. It was always something. "She is just rock. Joran," Cade said, though he kept his voice low. "High-density quartz composite. Mostly. Maybe some piezoelectric properties if the readings are right. But she is not watching anyone. She has been asleep for a millennium." The old man spat on the ground, a glob of moisture that sizzled on the hot stone. She is not asleep. She is waiting. Do not mock her, human. The curse of the Lissari falls on those who treat royalty with disrespect. Cade rolled his eyes, continuing his scan up the torso of the statue. The Lissari dynasty. He had read the briefs. They were a warlord culture that burned itself out centuries before humanity even figured out faster than light travel. They were myths. Boogeymen used to scare children in the outer rim. Go get some sleep. Joran, Cade said, dismissing him. I will be fine. The old man lingered for a moment longer, muttering something in a dialect Cade's universal translator failed to pick up, before shuffling away into the darkness. Cade was alone again. He worked for another 2 hours, moving the scanner painstakingly over every inch of the figure. The twin moons, one pale blue and the other a sickly orange, crested the horizon, casting long double shadows across the excavation pit. The temperature plummeted, the searing heat of the day replaced by a biting, dry chill. Cade sat down on the edge of the dais, his back aching. He fished a flask from his jacket pocket. It was battered steel, filled with cheap, unregulated gin he had bought from a smuggler at the spaceport. He unscrewed the cap and took a long pull. The liquid burned all the way down, settling in his stomach like a hot coal. It was the only warmth he had felt in months. He looked up at the statue. In the moonlight, the violet crystal seemed to glow from within, a faint pulsing luminescence that matched the rhythm of a slow heartbeat. It was a trick of the light, he knew, refraction and subsurface scattering, but it was convincing. You really are beautiful, Cade murmured, the alcohol loosening his tongue. The silence of the desert was absolute, making his voice sound loud and intrusive. He took another drink. He was 34 years old, and he had nothing to show for it but a bank account that hovered near zero, a failed marriage back on Earth, and a reputation for being difficult to work with. He was tired. He was so incredibly tired of the dust, the silence, and the meaningless accumulation of history that no one cared about. He stood up, swaying slightly, and walked around to face the statue. He looked up into her face. The sculptor had captured an expression of tragic defiance. She looked like she was about to speak, to issue a command that would level cities. 990 years, Cade said, raising the flask in a mock toast. Happy birthday, Your Highness. I bet you were a terror when you were alive. Probably had people like me executed for looking at you wrong. He chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. He stepped closer, peering at the delicate curve of her cheekbone. The crystal was smooth, flawless. There was no dust on her. The wind howled around the dais, but she remained pristine. Joran says you are watching, Cade whispered, leaning in until his face was inches from hers. He could smell ozone and something floral, like crushed lilies, emanating from the cold surface. What do you see? Just a broken dirt digger with a drinking problem? He felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of melancholy. It was the kind of loneliness that usually hit him at 3 in the morning, but the gin had brought it on early. He looked at her lips. They were full, perfectly shaped, frozen in that eternal half-breath. I wish, Cade said softly, his voice cracking. I wish someone like you would wake me up for once. It was a stupid, sentimental thought. Impulse took over. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to the cold, hard crystal of hers. It was a mocking kiss, a joke, a goodbye to a job he hated. He pulled back, smirking at his own foolishness. You are the only beautiful thing here, he whispered. Then, the statue blinked. Cade froze. His brain tried to process what he had just seen. A trick of the light, a shadow passing over the crystal. He blinked hard and looked again. The violet eyes, which had been sealed shut for nearly a millennium, were open. They were not crystal. They were organic, iridescent pools of gold and violet, swirling with a terrified, furious intelligence. They locked onto him with a focus that felt like a physical blow. Cade scrambled backward, dropping his flask. It clattered loudly on the stone. "Whoa," he gasped, stumbling over his own boots. The statue's lips moved. The crystal did not crack. It became flexible, moving like skin. A sound emerged, a whisper that seemed to bypass his ears and vibrate directly in his skull. It was a language of sharp consonants and flowing vowels, ancient and imperious. Before Cade could scream, the air around the dais convulsed. A shockwave of pure kinetic energy blasted outward. The crystal shell encasing the woman did not just break, it detonated. Thousands of shards of violet mineral exploded outward like shrapnel. Cade threw his arms over his face, diving flat against the stone floor. He felt the shards pelt his heavy jacket, stinging his exposed hands. A blinding white light flared, turning the night into high noon for a heartbeat. Then, the silence returned, heavier than before. Cade lay on the ground, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He waited for the pain, for the blood, but the shards had mostly missed him. He lowered his arms slowly and looked up. Standing in the center of the dais, amidst a pile of smoking, glittering dust, was the woman. She was real. She was flesh and blood, and she was stark naked. Her skin was pale, almost luminescent in the moonlight, glowing with a faint, rhythmic biological light. Long silver hair cascaded down her back, moving slightly as if underwater. She stood swaying, clutching her chest, gasping for air, her first breath in 1,000 years. Then the sirens began. A wailing, mechanical shriek tore through the air, coming from the perimeter sensors. The energy spike. The explosion had triggered the Level 5 containment alarm. The off-world patrol drones would be here in less than 5 minutes. The authority did not take kindly to people blowing up priceless artifacts. Cade scrambled to his feet. The woman turned her head sharply toward the sound of the sirens, her eyes widening in panic. She took a step, and her legs gave out. She collapsed, not like a statue, but like a person whose muscles had forgotten gravity. Cade moved without thinking. He lunged forward and caught her before she hit the sharp remnants of the crystal. She was unnaturally hot to the touch, her skin burning like she had a fever. She was heavy, solid, real. Hey, I have got you," Cade stammered, his mind racing. He looked at the flashing red lights on the horizon. Drones were already inbound. If they found her, if they found a live alien where a statue should be, they would dissect her. They would throw Cade in a black site prison for the rest of his life. The woman looked up at him, her golden violet eyes hazy. She grabbed his forearm, her grip shocking in its strength. She spoke again, urgency lacing the strange words. "I don't understand," Cade shouted over the sirens. "We have to go. Now!" He ripped off his heavy thermal cloak and wrapped it around her, covering her glowing skin. He hauled her to her feet. She stumbled, leaning heavily against him, her head lolling onto his shoulder. "Can you walk?" Cade yelled. She seemed to understand the intent, if not the words. She nodded weakly, gritting her teeth. Cade threw her arm over his shoulder and half dragged, half carried her off the dais. They hit the sand, and Cade turned away from the habitat modules. He couldn't go there. That was the first place they would look. He headed for the dunes, toward the rusted, decommissioned sandcrawler he had spotted earlier in the week, half buried in a drift 2 miles east. "Move. Come on. Move." Cade grunted, his boots slipping in the loose sand. The woman was surprisingly fast, her survival instinct overriding the atrophy of centuries. They scrambled up a dune as the first patrol drone screamed overhead, its spotlight sweeping the excavation site they had just left. The beam illuminated the shattered dais, the empty space where the artifact had been. They slid down the other side of the dune, tumbling into the shadow of the valley. Cade kept moving, his lungs burning. The alcohol in his system had evaporated, replaced by pure adrenaline. By the time they reached the sandcrawler, Cade's legs were jelly. The vehicle was a relic, a massive treaded beast left over from the first mining wars. It was tilted at a precarious angle, half swallowed by the desert. Cade jammed a pry bar into the side hatch and heaved. The rusted hydraulics groaned, then gave way with a screech of tearing metal. He shoved the hatch open and pushed the woman inside. He scrambled in after her and sealed the door just as the whine of repulsor engines echoed over the dunes. Darkness inside smelled of stale oil and dry rot. Cade collapsed against the bulkhead, sliding to the floor, gasping for breath. He fumbled for his flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut through the dusty air. The woman was huddled in the corner, wrapped in his dirty thermal cloak. She was shivering violently. Her eyes darted around the cramped metal interior, taking in the exposed wires, the rusty control panels, the dead screens. She looked terrified. She looked majestic. Cade held up his hands, trying to look harmless. "It is okay. You are safe. I am Cade. Cade." She stared at him. Her lips moved, testing the shape of the air. Then she spoke, her voice raspy but commanding. "Vera. Lissari. Koru." Cade tapped the universal translator on his wrist. It was sparking, the interface glitching from the earlier energy pulse. He smacked it hard against the bulkhead. The screen flickered to life, scrolling through linguistic algorithms at breakneck speed. "Speak again," Cade said, pointing to the device. She frowned, tilting her head. She pointed a long, elegant finger at her own chest. "Syriza Vera," the translator chirped. "Target language identified, Proto-Lysari High dialect. Archaic. Estimating syntax." The machine spoke a tiny, synthesized translation. "I am Ceresa, daughter of the Sunblood. Where is the—" "Silence?" Cade stared at her. "The silence? You mean the crystal?" She nodded slowly. The prison. The cold sleep. She looked down at her hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "I was ended. I was supposed to be ended." "No," Cade said, shifting his weight. "You were preserved for 990 years. Her head snapped up. The translator struggled with her next burst of speech. 900? No. The tyrant. Kaldrog. He comes for the wedding at the solstice." Cade let out a dry laugh. "Kaldrog has been dead for 10 centuries. His empire is dust. You are on Thalnari." She tried to stand, using the wall for support. The cloak slipped, revealing a shoulder that still glowed with that faint bioluminescent pulse. "Dead. The tyrant is dead." "Dead and gone," Cade confirmed. She slumped back down, a look of profound, shattering confusion crossing her face. Then, her stomach growled. It was a loud, undeniably human sound that cut through the tension. She looked down at her abdomen, startled, the pain, the hollow pain. "You are hungry," Cade said. He reached into his pack and pulled out a ration bar. It was a compressed block of nutrient paste, wrapped in silver foil. He peeled it open and held it out. "It is not a royal banquet, but it will keep you alive." She took it hesitantly, sniffing it. She wrinkled her nose. "It smells of ash." "It tastes like ash, too," Cade admitted. "Eat." She took a small bite. Her eyes widened at the flavor, or lack thereof, but she ate the rest ravenously. She licked her fingers, then paused, looking at Cade. You, the translator buzzed, you broke the seal with the ritual. Ritual? Cade asked, grabbing a canteen of water. The touch of lips, she said, her gaze intense, the breath of life. You performed the rite of awakening. Cade felt his face heat up. Yeah. Well, I did not know it was a rite. I was just drunk. She took the canteen he offered. She did not drink immediately. Instead, she poured a little into her palm and licked it up, her tongue darting out like a cat's. She closed her eyes, savoring the moisture. Water, she whispered. Real water. She opened her eyes and looked at the comm screen embedded in the wall of the crawler. It was dead, dark glass. She reached out to touch it. Careful, Cade warned. As her finger brushed the screen, a spark of violet energy jumped from her skin to the console. The screen flared to life with a blinding static roar, then blew out in a shower of sparks. She recoiled, hissing, pressing her back against the wall. Sorcery! It bites! It is electricity! Cade sighed, rubbing his temples. Your bioelectric field is off the charts. Do not touch anything electronic, okay? She looked at him, fear replaced by a haughty curiosity. I am Sarisa Vera of the Lysari. I do not take orders from a peasant in rags. She gestured disdainfully at his heavy canvas jacket. Is this what men wear now? It feels like the skin of a sand beast. It is synthetic weave, Cade said, offended. And this peasant just saved your life. She paused, processing this. She looked at the ration wrapper, the dead screen, the rust on the walls. Saved me, she murmured, into a world of ash and lightning. Suddenly, a buzzing sound filled the small space. Cade froze. A micro-drone, probably a scout from the patrol, had slipped through a vent in the crawler's hull. It hovered in the center of the cabin, its red eyes scanning them. Authority tech. Cade scrambled for his baton, but he was too slow. The drone's weapon port opened, targeting Sarisa. Sarisa didn't flinch. She glared at the machine. She raised her hand, palm open. The air around her rippled, a pulse of violet light, visible only for a fraction of a second, shot from her hand. The drone didn't explode, and it simply died. It dropped out of the air like a stone, clattering onto the metal floor. Cade stared at the dead machine, then at Sarisa. She lowered her hand, looking drained but satisfied. Annoying insects, she muttered. Cade swallowed hard. That was military-grade shielding on that drone. You just fried it with your mind. My aura, she corrected, as if stating the obvious. It is weak. I need rest. She curled up on the floor, pulling his cloak tighter around her. She looked vulnerable again, the imperious queen fading into a tired, scared young woman. Cade watched her. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that his life as a boring, cynical restorer was over. He was now an accomplice to the most significant biological discovery in galactic history. And she was a fugitive. Sarisa opened one eye. The ritual, she said softly, the touching of lips. Is it still sacred at this time? Cade looked at her. He thought about his ex-wife. He thought about the lonely nights in spaceports. He thought about the way people used each other for warmth and forgot each other by morning. No, Cade said, his voice hollow. Not anymore. Sarisa closed her eyes. A faint smile touched her lips. Good, she whispered. Then I owe you nothing. Within seconds. Her breathing evened out. She was asleep. Cade sat in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside the crawler, watching the faint violet glow of the alien princess illuminate the rust and the dust. He touched his own lips, remembering the cold shock of the crystal and the sudden searing heat that had followed. He checked the charge on his stun baton. He checked the seal on the door. "We are in so much trouble," he whispered to the sleeping princess. Outside, the searchlights of the Galactic Authority swept the dunes, hunting for the thief who had stolen history. But history was right here, curled up on the floor, dreaming of empires that had turned to dust 1,000 years ago. Cade took a drink of water, leaned his head back, and waited for the morning. The sky over Thalnari did not lighten with the dawn. It bruised. The twin suns struggled to pierce the heavy, particulate-laden atmosphere, casting a sickly, jaundiced glow over the dunes. But the real light came from above, from the piercing blue ion trails of the Galactic Authority dropships screaming down through the stratosphere. They descended like birds of prey, their engines roaring with a sound that vibrated in the marrow of Cade Rowan's bones. Inside the rusted husk of the sandcrawler, the vibration was deafening. Cade scrambled to the viewport, wiping away grime with a trembling hand. 3 heavy cruisers were settling over the excavation site, their landing struts crushing the ancient stone pillars he had spent weeks carefully excavating. "They are here," Cade said, his voice tight. He turned to Cerisa. "We have to move. Now." Cerisa sat on the metal floor, wrapped in his thermal cloak. Her eyes closed. She looked serene, almost bored, but the air around her hummed with static tension. She opened her eyes, the violet irises swirling. The iron birds screamed loudly. The translator on Cade's wrist chirped, "Do they hunt us?" "They hunt me," Cade corrected, grabbing his pack. "They hunt you to put you back in a box or worse." "Come on." He popped the hatch. The heat of the morning hit them like a physical blow. Cade grabbed her hand, her skin was still startlingly hot, and pulled her out into the dune shadow. They slid down the slope, away from the crawler, away from the dig site. "Where are we going?" Cerisa asked. Her grasp of the trade tongue was improving rapidly, absorbing Cade's vocabulary with terrifying speed. "The scrapyard," Cade panted, his boots sinking into the sand. "Old Joran keeps a salvage hauler fueled up. I paid him to keep it ready in case I ever needed to leave in a hurry. I just did not think the hurry would involve a resurrected alien princess." They ran. Cade's lungs burned, the dry air searing his throat. Behind them, the ground shook as the Authority troops deployed walkers. The mechanical thud-thud-thud of heavy footsteps echoed through the canyons. They reached the salvage yard, a graveyard of ships half buried in the sand. Joran's hauler was an ugly, asymmetric thing, a retrofitted ore hopper with mismatched thrusters and a hull that looked like it had been welded together by a blind man. But the ramp was down. Cade shoved Cerisa up the ramp and punched the seal command. The hydraulic hiss of the door closing was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. "Can you fly this?" Cade yelled, running to the cockpit. He threw himself into the pilot's seat and started flipping switches. The board lit up with angry red warnings. Fuel pressure low. Coolant leak. Stabilizers offline. I am an archaeologist, not a pilot. Cade cursed, wrestling with the yoke. "Come on, you piece of junk. Turn over." The engines coughed, sputtered, and died. Outside, a walker crested the ridge. Its heavy cannons swiveled, locking onto the hauler. Cade froze. "We are dead. We are sitting ducks." Cerisa stepped into the cockpit. She let the thermal cloak slide off her shoulders. She was still naked, her body glowing with that faint rhythmic pulse, but she moved with the authority of a storm front. She pushed Cade's hands away from the controls. "Move," she commanded. "You do not know how to fly a starship," Cade snapped. "This is 10 centuries more advanced than—" "Move," she repeated, Her voice dropping an octave. Cade scrambled out of the chair. Cerisa sat down. She did not look at the buttons. She did not look at the screens. She placed her hands flat on the dashboard console. Her eyes closed. The violet light under her skin flared, traveling down her arms into her fingertips, and then, impossibly, into the ship. The console lights flickered from angry red to a soothing, rhythmic violet. The engines did not cough this time. They roared to life with a harmonious, singing hum that sounded nothing like a combustion drive. The ship lurched upward, defying gravity with a smoothness that should have been impossible for its tonnage. "Hold on," Cerisa whispered. She tilted her head, and the ship banked hard, accelerating at a G-force that pinned Cade against the bulkhead. Through the viewport, he saw the Authority Walker fire. The plasma bolts sailed harmlessly through the space where they had been a second before. They shot straight up, punching through the atmosphere. The sky turned from yellow to indigo to the star-speckled black of the void. Cade slid down the wall, gasping for air. He looked at Cerisa. She was still merged with the ship, her hands glowing against the metal. She was not piloting it, she was willing it to move. "You," Cade wheezed. "You have flown before." Cerisa opened her eyes. The glow faded from the console. The ship settled into a steady cruise velocity. "I commanded the sky ships of Lissari," she said, her voice distant. "The mechanics are different. The spirit of the machine is the same. It wanted to fly. I let it." Cade stood up, his legs shaky. He walked over to the nav computer. They were in deep orbit, masked by the magnetic interference of the planet's rings. He punched in a random vector just to get them moving away from the Authority blockade. He looked at her. She was staring out at the stars, a look of profound, aching hunger on her face. "It has been a long time since I saw them," she said softly. "The stars have moved. The constellations are wrong. 1,000 years will do that," Cade said. He pulled up a holographic news feed on the main screen. He needed to know how bad it was. It was bad. The holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the cockpit. A news anchor, sharp-jawed and serious, hovered in blue light. The headline scrolled beneath him in bold galactic basic. Class 1 artifact theft. Biological weapon missing. Suspect identified. Cade's face, grainy and unflattering from his security ID, rotated next to a digital reconstruction of the statue. The suspect, Cade Rowan, is considered armed and mentally unstable. The anchor said, "The artifact, a preserved bioform from the forbidden Lissari era, is deemed highly volatile. Citizens are warned. Do not approach. The Council has authorized lethal force." Cade groaned, rubbing his face. "Lethal force. Great. I am a dead man." Cerisa stood up and walked toward the hologram. She stared at the digital image of the statue, her prison. Then she looked at the scrolling text. "They call me a weapon," she said. "Not a person, a weapon." "That is what the Council does," Cade said bitterly. "If they can't tax it, they weaponize it." Cerisa reached out, her hand passing through the hologram. She closed her eyes, and Cade saw her fingers twitch. The hologram flickered, the news feed distorted, static washing over the anchor's face. "What are you doing?" Cade asked. "Listening," Cerisa said. "The air is full of voices, invisible rivers of words. I can hear them." She was accessing the wireless data stream, without an implant, without a computer. She was pulling the signal straight out of the ether. The hologram shifted. It was no longer the news. It was a montage of propaganda videos, history files from the Galactic Authority archives. Images flashed by, Lissari temples burning, statues being toppled, and then a face, Cerisa's face, but twisted. In the video, she stood on a balcony, her eyes glowing red, commanding armies of monstrous flesh-warped soldiers. She looked cruel. She looked evil, the flesh-born queens. A narrator's voice boomed, tyrants who enslaved the sector with biological sorcery. Defeated by the glorious founding of the council. Cerisa gasped, stumbling back as if struck. "No," she whispered. "That is a lie. That is not what happened." The video looped, the image of her face, distorted by history, sneered down at her. Cerisa fell to her knees, clutching her head. The memories hit her, not the digital lies, but the truth. The cockpit of the salvage ship dissolved. She was back in the Temple of the Sun. The air smelled of heavy incense and copper blood. She was on her knees, chains of gold and heavy light binding her wrists. The floor was cold obsidian. Before her stood her sister, Varya, who wore the crown. Varya, whose eyes were cold and hard. "Join us, Cerisa," Varya said, her voice echoing in the vast hall. "The fleet is ready. The Emperor offers you the sector of Othris. All you must do is kneel. Give him your blood. Let him breed the soldiers." Cerisa looked up, spit mixed with blood on her lip. "I will not be a broodmare for a warmonger. I will not break worlds for you." Varya sighed, a sound of disappointment, not pity. "Then you will be nothing. You will be a stone in the garden, watching the universe age while you remain frozen. You will scream in silence for eternity." The liquid crystal began to pour from the ceiling, hot and suffocating. It covered her feet, her legs. Cerisa screamed, but she did not beg. "Cerisa! Cerisa!" Cade's voice snapped her back. She was on the floor of the cockpit, shaking. Cade was kneeling beside her, his hands hovering near her shoulders, afraid to touch her. Cerisa looked at him, her eyes wide and wet. "They lied," she choked out. "They said I was a tyrant, but I was the one who said no." "I believe you," Cade said. He surprised himself by meaning it. He had seen the footage. He knew how history was written by the winners. "We need to go," Cerisa said, wiping her face. She stood up, her legs steadying. "There is a place, a satellite temple. If it still exists." "Where?" Cade asked. "The Othris system," she said, "orbiting the dead gas giant. My personal archives were there. If the Council has not found them, the truth is waiting." Cade went to the nav computer. Othris was a restricted zone, a dead system, no shipping lanes. Perfect for hiding. Punching it in, Cade said. "You might want to put some clothes on. We have a long trip." Cade found a spare flight suit in the locker. It was too big for her, the sleeves rolling up past her elbows, but she belted it tightly at the waist. She looked ridiculous and regal all at once. The journey took 2 days. They barely spoke. Cerisa spent the time meditating, or perhaps recharging, sitting cross-legged in the cargo hold. Cade spent the time watching the rear sensors, waiting for the inevitable authority pursuit. When they dropped out of hyperspace, the Othris giant filled the viewport. It was a massive, bruised planet of swirling brown and gray storms. Orbiting it was a debris field of shattered moons. And there, hidden in the shadow of a massive asteroid, was the temple. It was a spire of black stone and silver metal, drifting silently in the void. It was dead, dark, and freezing. Cade docked the hauler at a ruined airlock. The seal held, barely. They suited up, Cade in his battered EVA gear, Cerisa simply pulling the flight suit collar up. "I do not need the air," she explained when Cade offered her a helmet. "My body can sustain itself on internal energy for hours." They floated into the temple. Gravity was offline. They drifted through vast vaulted hallways covered in dust that had not been disturbed for a millennium. The flashlight beams cut through the gloom, illuminating frescoes that had been defaced, faces scratched out by laser chisels long ago. "This was my home," Cerisa whispered, her voice carrying in the thin atmosphere. "Before the war." They reached the central sanctum. It was a spherical room, the walls lined with dormant data crystals. In the center was a console shaped like a lotus flower. Cerisa drifted toward it. She placed her hand on the console. "Wake up," she commanded. The room shuddered. Emergency power flickered online, bathing the sanctum in a low, amber light. The artificial gravity kicked in with a lurch, slamming them both to the floor. Cade groaned, standing up and dusting himself off. "Warning next time. Please." Cerisa ignored him. She was manipulating the holographic interface that had sprung from the Lotus console. Streams of data, written in the sharp, geometric Lissari script, scrolled through the air. She found it. "Here," she said, "the final log." She twisted her hand, and a recording began to play. It was a three-dimensional projection, filling the room. It showed the same scene from her flashback, the throne room, the chains. But this time, Cade saw the context. He saw the figures standing in the shadows behind Varya. They were not Lissari, they were humans, and other species, dressed in the robes of the early Galactic Federation. "The agreement is signed," one of the humans said. "We supply the containment technology. You supply the prisoner. Her genetic material will be shared." Varya nodded. "Take her blood. Just ensure she never wakes up to claim the throne." Cerisa watched the recording, tears streaming down her face. "It was not just my sister," she whispered. "It was the council, the founders of your authority. They helped her. They wanted our biology." Cade stepped closer to the hologram. He squinted at the human figure in the recording, the one who had spoken. The man wore a distinctive insignia on his collar, a stylized hawk clutching a star. Cade felt the blood drain from his face. "Rewind that," Cade said, his voice trembling. "Freeze on the human." Cerisa obeyed. The image froze. Cade stared at the man. He knew that face. He had seen it in the digital photo albums his grandmother used to keep. That is Silas Rowan," Cade whispered. "Who?" Cerisa asked, turning to him. "My great-grandfather," Cade said, feeling sick. "He was an admiral in the early Federation fleet. The history books say he died in a shuttle accident. But here he is, dealing with the Lissari, trading technology for a prisoner." He looked at Cerisa, horror dawning on him. "My family. My bloodline. We put you in that statue. Silas Rowan was the one who locked you away." Cerisa stared at him. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. The amber light reflected in her eyes, making them look like burning coals. "You knew?" she asked quietly. "No!" Cade shouted, backing away. "No, I swear! I am a restorer. I dig up pots. I did not know my great-grandfather was a war criminal. I did not know he was the one who—" He trailed off. The implication hung in the air. Cade wasn't just a random human who had found her. Fate, or some twisted cosmic irony, had brought the descendant of her jailer to be the one to wake her up. Cerisa turned away from the hologram. She walked to the edge of the room, looking out the viewport at the swirling storms of the gas giant below. "So," she said, her voice flat, "your blood cages me, and your blood freed me. The circle is complete." She did not sound angry. She sounded exhausted. Cade walked over to her. He stopped a few feet away, unsure if she would strike him with that terrifying energy of hers. "I am sorry," he said. "It is not enough. I know. but I am sorry for what he did." Sarisa turned to face him. In the dim light of the dead temple, she looked ethereal, a ghost made of solid matter. She looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face. "Do you fear me, Cade Rowan?" she asked. Cade hesitated. He thought about the drone she had crushed. He thought about the way she piloted the ship with her mind. He thought about the power she held, power that could level cities. "Yes," he said honestly. Her shoulders slumped slightly. "But," Cade continued, stepping closer, "only when you look at me like you can see every scar I have buried." Sarisa tilted her head. "I do see them," she whispered. "Not on your skin, but in your biorhythm. Your heart beats with a stutter, a hesitation. You expect pain. You are always waiting for the next blow." She reached out. Cade flinched, then held his ground. Her fingers, cool now, brushed his cheek. Her touch sent a shiver through him that had nothing to do with fear. "You were lonely, in the sand," she said. "You spoke to a stone because you thought no one else would listen." "Yeah," Cade choked out. "I guess I was." "You are not cursed by your ancestor, Cade," she said softly. Her thumb traced the line of his jaw. "You are awake. You are the only one who is awake in a galaxy of sleepers." The distance between them vanished. The tension that had been building since the excavation site, the fear, the adrenaline, the confusion coalesced into something else, something magnetic. Cade forgot about the council. He forgot about his great-grandfather. He forgot that she was a 1,000-year-old alien princess who could kill him with a thought. He only saw the woman who had been trapped in the dark, just like him. He leaned in. She did not pull away. Their lips met. It was not like the mocking kiss in the desert. This was gentle, reverent. It was a question and an answer all at once. Her lips were soft, tasting of the recycled air and something electric, like the smell of a storm before the rain falls. Cade placed his hand on her waist, pulling her closer. She gasped into his mouth, her hands tangling in his hair. As they kissed, the room responded. The dormant crystals lining the walls began to resonate. A low harmonic tone filled the air, vibrating in Cade's chest. Faint, violet sparks danced around them, drifting like snowflakes in the zero gravity of the moment. She broke the kiss, breathless, her forehead resting against his. Her eyes were glowing brightly now, illuminating the space between them. "You woke me up," she whispered, fierce and terrifyingly vulnerable. "Do not let me go back to sleep. I won't," Cade promised, his voice rough. "I got you." They stood there in the ruins of her past, the galaxy hunting them, the ghosts of their ancestors watching from the holograms. But for the first time in 990 years for her, and 34 years for him. Neither of them was alone. The console beeped, a proximity alarm. Cade pulled back, breathless. "Someone found us?" Sarisa looked at the screen. No, not someone. A signal, a beacon. She tapped the console. The holographic map zoomed out. A red dot pulsed on the edge of the Author's system. "It is a distress call," Sarisa said, her voice hardening. "Encrypted with Lysari codes. Survivors?" Cade asked, hope flaring. "Or a trap," Sarisa said. "But we have to go. If there are others, if the council missed someone." She looked at Cade. "Are you with me?" Cade looked at the woman who had just turned his world upside down. He looked at the scar on his hand from the excavation work. He looked at the stars. "Always," he said. Sarisa smiled. "A dangerous, beautiful thing. Then let us finish what we started." The silence of deep space was a deception. To Cade Rowan, it usually felt like a heavy blanket, a comfort after years of listening to the screaming winds of desert moons. But tonight, inside the cockpit of the salvaged hauler, the silence felt like a held breath. He watched the sensor array, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Beside him, Cerisa sat in the co-pilot's chair. She was not sleeping. She never seemed to sleep in a way Cade understood. She simply went still, her violet eyes losing focus as if she were watching a movie playing on the inside of her eyelids. The faint rhythmic glow of her skin cast long, shifting shadows across the rusted instrument panel. They were 3 days out from the Othras system, drifting dark to avoid the Authority patrols. Cade rubbed the back of his neck. "We should be clear of the shipping lanes by morning," he said, his voice rasping in the recycled air. "If the nav computer holds together, we can reach the fringe sectors in 2 days. Cerisa did not answer immediately. Her head tilted sharply to the left. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what?" Cade asked, glancing at the comms. The scope was clear, static, a heartbeat, she said, but not of flesh, a heartbeat of burning plasma. Close, very close. Cade's stomach dropped. He reached for the throttle, but the ship shuddered violently before his hand even touched the lever. A metallic clang echoed through the hull, loud enough to rattle his teeth. The artificial gravity fluctuated, throwing Cade against his safety harness. "Grapple beam!" Cade shouted, his hands flying across the controls. "Someone is locking us down." The sensor screen lit up with a terrifying proximity warning. A sleek, matte black interceptor had decloaked directly above them. It was not Authority. It was uglier. A modified heavy assault corvette, painted with the jagged red skull insignia of the Void Stalkers, bounty hunters. "They are breaching the airlock," Cade yelled, unbuckling his harness. He grabbed his stun baton and a heavy laser cutter he had scavenged from the tool locker. "Cerisa, stay here. Keep the engines primed. I do not hide," Cerisa said. She stood up, the flight suit she wore looking absurdly mundane against the terrifying calm of her expression. The airlock door behind the cockpit hissed. Sparks showered down as a plasma torch cut through the locking mechanism. With a groan of tortured metal, the door was kicked inward. 4 figures stormed onto the bridge. They were armored in patchwork plasteel, faces obscured by rebreather masks. The lead hunter, a massive brute of a man wielding a pulse cannon, leveled his weapon at Cade. "Hands where I can see them." "Relic digger!" the hunter roared, his voice distorted by a modulator. "The council put a price on your head that could buy a small moon. And the girl. Double for the girl if she is intact." Cade raised the laser cutter, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Back off. You have no idea what you are dealing with." The hunter laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I am dealing with a payday. Drop the cutter or I vaporize your legs." Cade hesitated. He was an archaeologist, not a soldier. He calculated the odds. 4 heavily armed mercenaries against 1 man with a mining tool and a woman who had been a statue a week ago. Before Cade could decide whether to surrender or die fighting, Cerisa stepped forward. She moved with a fluid, liquid grace that made the hunters flinch. "You intrude," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a resonance that vibrated the deck plates. "You seek to chain me." The lead hunter swung his cannon toward her. "Quiet, asset, or I stun you and drag you out unconscious." Cerisa tilted her head. She looked at the hunter, then at the metal walls of the ship's corridor behind him. She raised her right hand, fingers splayed. The air in the cockpit grew instantly heavy, charged with the smell of ozone and crushed flowers. The violet light beneath Cerisa's skin flared, turning blindingly bright. "Kneel," she commanded. She clenched her hand into a fist. The hunter did not kneel. He screamed. Cade watched in horror as the bulkhead wall behind the hunters groaned. The solid durasteel did not melt, it warped. It rippled like water disturbed by a stone. The metal twisted inward, responding to Cerisa's biofield as if it were living tissue obeying a nerve impulse. The walls slammed together, slammed. The two hunters in the rear were crushed instantly, the metal folding over them with a sickening crunch. The lead hunter turned, firing his cannon in panic. The plasma bolt struck Cerisa's shoulder, but it dissipated against an invisible violet barrier inches from her skin. She flicked her wrist. The floor plating beneath the lead hunter buckled and shot upward, driving him into the ceiling with enough force to shatter his armor. He fell to the deck, motionless. The last hunter, a smaller alien with 4 eyes, dropped his weapon and scrambled backward, gibbering in terror. Cerisa looked at him. Her eyes were no longer gold and violet, they were pure incandescent purple. She took a step forward, the deck warping under her bare feet. "Cerisa, stop!" Cade shouted. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm. The contact was like touching a live wire. A shock jolted up Cade's arm, numbing his shoulder. He gasped but didn't let go. "Stop," he pleaded. "They are down. It is over." Cerisa looked at him. For a second, she did not recognize him. She looked like a titan, a force of nature contained in human skin. Then, the glow faded, her eyes cleared. She looked at the twisted wreckage of the hunters and the warped metal of the ship. She slumped, leaning against Cade for support. Cade looked at the bodies. He looked at the wall, which had been reshaped as easily as wet clay. He felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his stomach. This was not just telekinesis, this was matter manipulation on a molecular level. What was that? Cade whispered, staring at her. Cerisa pulled away from him, smoothing her flight suit. She refused to meet his eyes. "I told you," she said, her voice hollow. "I was not just a princess, Cade. I was a weapon. I was once taught to end empires." She walked past him to the pilot's chair, stepping over the body of the hunter she had broken. "Get us out of here, Cade, before more comes." The hauler was bleeding. The battle had ruptured the port maneuverability thrusters, and Cerisa's defensive outburst had compromised the structural integrity of the main hull. "We have to put it down," Cade said, fighting the stick. The ship bucked and rattled as they dropped out of warp space. The navigation computer flashed a red warning. Critical failure. There, Cerisa pointed at the view screen. A small, sickly green moon hung in the void ahead of them. "That is Voris 6, Cade said, checking the charts. "It is a rogue terraform, failed colony world, run by syndicates and smugglers. It is a cesspool. It has oxygen," Cerisa said, "and gravity, and probably 500 people who would sell us for a bottle of water," Cade muttered. "But we have no choice." He wrestled the ship into the moon's gravity well. The entry was brutal. The atmosphere of Voris 6 was thick with industrial smog and neon rain. The hauler screamed as it cut through the cloud layer, hull plating glowing cherry red. "Hold on!" Cade yelled. They slammed into the outskirts of a sprawling, rust-colored city. The landing gear sheared off on impact. The ship skidded across a field of chemical mud, plowing through a fence of razor wire before grinding to a halt against the skeletal remains of a factory. Silence returned, punctuated only by the hiss of cooling metal and the distant wail of sirens. Cade kicked the emergency hatch open. "We have maybe 10 minutes before the wreckers show up to strip the ship," he said. "Grab the data drive, grab the water, leave the rest." They scrambled out into the rain. The air on Voris 6 smelled of sulfur and frying grease. Above them, the sky was a bruised purple, lit by the flickering holographic advertisements of the Undercity. They moved quickly, hoods pulled up, blending into the shadows of the industrial district. Cerisa walked close to Cade, her eyes scanning the chaotic streets with a mixture of revulsion and fascination. "Where do we go?" she asked. "I have a friend here," Cade said, checking his bearings against the towering rusted spires of the city. "Or at least, I used to, if she has not drunk herself to death or been airlocked by a crime lord." They navigated the labyrinthine alleys of the sector known as the Rust Market. Stalls sold everything from illegal organ transplants to salvage droid parts. Creatures of a dozen species watched them from the shadows, eyes gleaming with predatory intent. Cade stopped in front of a dilapidated shop with a flickering neon sign that read, "Archives Ale." He hammered on the metal door. "Go away," a voice shouted from inside. "We are closed and armed. Lyra, it is Cade," he called out. "Cade Rowan." There was a long silence, then the sound of heavy locks disengaging. The door creaked open a crack. A woman with a cybernetic eye and shock-white hair peered out. She held a scattergun leveled at Cade's chest. "You are dead," she said flatly. "I saw the news. You stole a statue and blew up a dig site. I did not steal her," Cade said, "and I am not dead. Yet. Can we come in?" Lyra's mechanical eye whirred, focusing on the hooded figure behind Cade. "Who is the shadow?" "The statue," Cade whispered. Lyra's human eye went wide. She yanked the door open. "Get in, before I change my mind." The interior of the shop was a cluttered mess of data stacks, ancient paper books, and half-dismantled droids. It smelled of old paper and strong coffee. Lyra locked the door and turned to them. Cerisa lowered her hood. Lyra dropped her scattergun. It clattered on the floor and by the void. She breathed. She walked around Cerisa, staring. "It is real. The Lysari physiology. The bioluminescence. You are a 990. "I am Cerisa," the princess said stiffly. "And I would like some water." Lyra cleared a table in the back room, pushing aside stacks of illegal star charts. She was shaking. "I thought it was a myth," Lyra said, pouring a glass of filtered water for Cerisa, the sleeping princess, the flesh that turns to crystal. "Cade, do you have any idea what the bounty is on her?" "Enough to buy this whole moon," Cade said, sinking into a chair. He looked at Lyra. She had been one of the best historians at the university before she got blacklisted for asking too many questions about the Council's founding era. "You can decode the Lysari drive we found, can't you?" Lyra looked at the crystalline data shard Cade had placed on the table. "Lysari encryption is fluid. It changes based on the reader's biorhythm. But," she glanced at Cerisa, "if she touches it while I run the algorithm, maybe." Cerisa placed her hand on the shard. It glowed, projecting a spherical map of data into the smoky air of the room. Lyra's fingers flew across her interface keyboard. "I am bypassing the decay, translating the metadata. Goddess, look at this." The projection shifted. It showed biological schematics, DNA helixes that were being rewritten, expanded, weaponized. "This is not just a history log," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "This is a research paper. The Council. They were not trying to suppress the Lysari because they were tyrants. They were trying to reverse engineer them." "Reverse engineer what?" Cade asked. "The breeding protocol," Cerisa said softly. She was staring at the schematic of a woman's body, her body. Lyra nodded, reading the scrolling text. Project Fleshborn. The Council discovered that Lysari royalty carried a genetic marker, a pathogen, almost. It allows for the manipulation of inorganic matter through bioelectric fields. "Like what you did on the ship," Cade realized. Lyra continued. "The Council wanted to mass-produce it. They wanted an army of soldiers who could crush starship hulls with their minds. but they needed a pure source, a queen. Cerisa closed her eyes. Varya, my sister. She agreed to the terms. But she was weak. Her blood was diluted. She could not sustain the transformation. She looked at Cade. That is why they wanted me. I was an anomaly, the trueborn. I was capable of becoming a flesh-born queen, a living hive mind capable of enslaving 10 worlds at once. Cade felt a chill. You were going to conquer the galaxy. No, Cerisa said fiercely. I was told it was my duty, to marry the warlord Khaldrog and birth a dynasty of gods. But when I saw what the transformation entailed, when I saw that I would lose my mind, myself, and become nothing but a breeding vessel for weapons, I refused. She touched her chest. I stole the stasis crystal from the temple. It was forbidden. Only the dead were meant to use it. I drank the liquid essence. I chose to turn myself to stone rather than become a monster. The room was silent. Cade looked at her with new eyes. She wasn't a victim of a coup. She was a conscientious objector who had sentenced herself to 1,000 years of solitary confinement to save the galaxy from herself. You saved everyone, Cade whispered, by sleeping. And now I am awake, Cerisa said bitterly, and the Council still wants their weapon. We need to lay low until the heat dies down, Lyra said. I can forge new IDs for you, but it will take time. The encryption on these files is deep. There is more here. A list of names, locations of hidden labs. I need air, Cerisa said suddenly. She stood up. The walls, they are too close. I will go with her, Cade said. He grabbed a heavy poncho from a hook. Cover up. This isn't a palace. They walked through the undercity. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the garish neon signs of the brothels and gambling dens. Steam rose from the vents, curling around their ankles. Cerisa walked with her head down, but her eyes missed nothing. She watched a group of scavengers fighting over a piece of tech. She watched a beggar pleading for credits. This world, she murmured. It is ugly, but it is alive. They turned down a narrow alleyway to avoid a patrol of syndicate enforcers. Halfway down, Cerisa stopped. In the shadows of a recessed doorway, a couple stood pressed together, a human man and a Twi'lek woman. They were oblivious to the grime, the smell, the danger. They were locked in an embrace, his hands cupping her face, her leku twitching with emotion. They were kissing, slow and deep, whispering frantic, soft things against each other's skin. Cerisa watched them, transfixed. Come on, Cade said, tugging gently on her sleeve. It is rude to stare. She did not move. She watched until the couple broke apart, breathless, laughing softly before disappearing into a building. Cerisa turned to Cade. Her eyes were wide, filled with a confusion that looked painful. That. She gestured to the empty doorway. That was not a ritual. That was not for procreation. No, Cade said, feeling awkward. Just affection. Affection. She tested the word. In the Lissari courts, touch was currency. A kiss was a seal of contract. A marriage was a strategic alignment of bloodlines. We were not permitted to simply want. She looked at Cade. The act of devotion. The joining of bodies. Is it always like that? Desperate? Cade looked at the graffiti on the walls. Sometimes, when the world is falling apart, sometimes grabbing onto someone else is the only way to know you are still real. It is not always pretty. But yeah, it is. It is necessary. Cerisa looked at him, her gaze dropping to his lips, then back to his eyes. Show me, she whispered. Cade choked on his own breath. What? Show me what it means to want without a contract, she said. She took a step toward him. The alley was dark, but she was glowing again, a soft, warm pulse that lit up the rain-slicked stones. Cerisa, Cade said, his voice tight. We are in an alley behind a noodle shop. And you are overwhelmed. You have been awake for a week after 1,000 years of sensory deprivation. You don't know what you are asking. I know exactly what I am asking, she said, her voice regal and stubborn. I am tired of being a statue, Cade. I want to be flesh. Cade stepped back, his heart pounding. I can't. Not like this. Not here. He turned and walked away, fast. He heard her footsteps following him, lighter than his, but heavy with unspoken frustration. Back in Lyra's safe house, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Lyra had gone to the server farm in the basement to run a decrypt cycle, leaving them alone in the small living quarters above the shop. Cade pulled off his wet shirt, wincing as the fabric stuck to the old burn scar on his back, a souvenir from a plasma blowout on Xylos. He tossed the shirt on the floor and went to the sink to wash his face. He needed cold water. He needed to think straight. When he turned around, Cerisa was standing in the doorway to the refresher. She had shed the oversized poncho. She was wearing a simple tank top Lyra had lent her, which left her arms and collarbone bare. She was staring at his chest. Cade had a lot of scars. The life of an interstellar excavator was not gentle. There was a jagged white line running from his ribs to his hip from a cave-in. There were circular burn marks on his shoulder. I am a mess. I know, Cade muttered, reaching for a towel to cover himself. Don't, Cerisa said. She crossed the room. She did not float. She walked, her bare feet slapping softly on the concrete floor. She stopped inches from him. She reached out and touched the jagged scar on his ribs. Her fingers were cool, but where they touched, his skin burned pleasantly. This one? She asked. Mining drill, Cade said, his voice barely a whisper. It slipped. She traced the line upward to the burns on his shoulder. And these? Fuel line explosion. She looked up at his face. Her eyes were luminous, swimming with tears she refused to shed. You look at yourself and see broken things, she whispered. You see damage. Yeah. Well, Cade said. That is what I am. A broken man digging up broken things. Cerisa shook her head. She pressed her palm flat against his heart. He could feel the hum of her energy, a vibration that synced with his own pulse. No, she said fiercely. A statue is perfect. A statue has no scars. And a statue is dead. She moved her hand up to cup his neck, her thumb brushing his lower lip. Your body is not broken, Cade, she whispered. It is history. It is a map of every time you survived. Cade stopped breathing. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fear behind the regality. He saw the woman who had chosen stone over slavery, now choosing him over safety. Cerisa, he warned, his voice cracking, if we do this, I am not a king. I can't give you an empire. I have ended empires, she said, her voice trembling with intensity. I do not want a throne. I want you. She kissed him. It was not gentle this time. It was desperate. It was a collision of two lonely stars. Cade made a low sound in his throat and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into him. She felt solid, strong, and impossibly warm. They stumbled backward, hitting the narrow cot in the corner of the room. Cade pulled her down with him. When he touched her skin, it responded. As his hands moved over her back, her bioluminescence flared, shifting from violet to a deep, pulsing gold. It rippled under his fingertips like liquid light. It was strange, alien, and overwhelming. The air in the room grew heavy with static charge. The dust motes dancing in the light of the street lamp outside seemed to freeze in place. Cerisa gasped as Cade kissed the hollow of her throat. She arched her back, and a wave of kinetic energy washed over the room, rattling the windows in their frames. "Careful," Cade murmured against her skin. "You will bring the building down." "Let it fall," she whispered back. When they finally joined, it was terrifying and sacred. It was not just physical. Cade felt a connection slam into his mind, a psychic link that he hadn't been prepared for. He felt her 1,000 years of cold silence. He felt her terror of the dark, and he felt her sudden, blinding joy at the sensation of heat, of friction, of being held. She glowed beneath him, casting his shadow long and stark against the ceiling. Her eyes were open, wide and unblinking, fixed on his face as if she were memorizing him. "You are awake," she commanded him, her voice echoing in his head as much as his ears. "Look at me." "I am looking." Cade gasped. "I am seeing nothing else." For the first time in a millennium, the Princess of Lissari was not a symbol, or a weapon, or a statue. She was a woman, crying out in the dark of a smuggler's moon, anchored to the world by the scarred hands of a human who loved her. And as they moved together, the light of her skin bathed Cade's scars in gold, making them look, for just a moment, like veins of precious metal running through the rock. The digital ghost of the bounty data hovered in the stagnant air of Lyra's safe-house back room. It was a tangled web of shell corporations and encrypted routing numbers. But Lyra, fueled by caffeine and spite, had unraveled it. She sat back in her chair, her cybernetic eye whirring as it cooled down. Her human eye, bloodshot and wide, looked from the screen to Cade. "It is not a guild," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is not the syndicate. It is not a private collector." Cade leaned over her shoulder, tracing the golden line of the transaction path. "Then who put the price on Cerisa? Who has that kind of money to burn on a black budget operation?" Lyra tapped a key. The final layer of encryption dissolved, revealing a seal that made Cade's blood run cold. It was a stylized sun eclipsed by a hawk's wing. "The Bureau of Xenostability," Cade read aloud, the words tasting like ash. "That is a subcommittee of the Galactic Council." "It is the secret police," Lyra corrected, grabbing her scattergun and checking the charge. "The people who make problems disappear." "Cade, the government isn't just looking for her. They hired the hunters. They are paying criminals to do their dirty work so their hands stay clean." Cerisa stood by the window, watching the neon rain of Vorus 6 streak the glass. She had been quiet since they woke up, the intimacy of the previous night hanging between her and Cade like a heavy, beautiful curtain. She turned now, her expression hardening. "They fear exposure," she said. "If they send their own fleets, questions are asked. If they send pirates, it is just another tragedy in the lawless rim." She walked to the table and looked at the council seal. "We need to know why," Cade said. "We know they want your biology, but why now? Why wake you up just to hunt you down?" "There is a name here," Lyra said, pointing to a sub-file attached to the bounty order. "An informant. Someone who confirmed the location of the excavation site before Cade even got there." Cade squinted at the alien script. "I can't read Lissari." "Cerisa can," Lyra said. Cerisa leaned in, her eyes narrowed, the violet irises constricting. Her breath hitched in her throat. "Valerius," she whispered. "Who?" Cade asked. Cerisa pulled back, her face pale. "He was my betrothed's cousin. a minor lord of the House of Koru. He was the one who drafted the marriage contract to the warlord. He was the one who told me to submit. He would have been dead for 10 centuries, Cade said. Cerisa shook her head slowly. Not if he made a deal. The Council has life extension technology, does it not? For the elite. Yeah, Cade said. Telomere regeneration. But it is illegal for anyone outside the High Senate. If Valerius is the informant, Cerisa said, her voice turning to ice, then he is alive. And he is close. The signal origin for this file. It is local. Lyra checked the coordinates. You are right. He is here on Vorus 6, in the penthouse spire of the trade district. Cade grabbed his jacket. If he is here, he knows what the Council is planning. He knows the endgame. We go to him, Cerisa said. She looked at Cade, and for a moment, the vulnerability of the night before was gone, replaced by the terrifying resolve of a queen. We go to him, and I will ask him why he sold our people to the stars. The trade district was a gleaming needle of glass and steel rising out of the smog of the industrial slums. It was a fortress for the untouchable crime lords and exiled politicians who used Vorus 6 as a tax haven. Getting in required a distraction. Lyra provided it by hacking the localized traffic grid and causing a 300-car pileup on the lower maglev tracks. While the security drones swarmed the accident, Cade, Lyra, and Cerisa slipped into the service elevator of the spire. They ascended in silence. Cade checked his stun baton. Lyra checked her scattergun. Cerisa just stood with her hands clasped, staring at the floor numbers ticking upward. 100 floors. 150. When the doors opened on the penthouse level, the air smelled of synthetic lavender and antiseptic. The room was vast, lined with windows that looked out over the toxic clouds. In the center of the room, suspended in a grav chair that looked more like a life support pod, sat a creature. It was humanoid, but barely. His skin was paper-thin, stretched over brittle bones. Tubes ran into his neck and chest, pumping glowing blue fluid into his withered veins. Cerisa stepped out of the elevator. Her heels clicked on the marble floor. Valerius, she said. The figure in the chair stirred. Monitors beeped faster. The head turned slowly, the neck mechanics whirring. Milky eyes widened. Cerisa, the creature rasped. His voice was wet and weak, amplified by a vocal synthesizer. You look exactly the same, and you look like a corpse that forgot to die, Cerisa said, stopping a few feet from him. Cade and Lyra fanned out, securing the room. It was empty of guards. Valerius was arrogant, or perhaps he just didn't care anymore. I waited. Valerius wheezed. I knew the human would wake you. I told them. Send a dreamer, I said. Send a lonely man. Only a fool will kiss the stone. Why? Cerisa demanded. Why did you help them? Valerius laughed, a sound that turned into a hacking cough. Survival, my dear. The dynasty was falling. The warlord would have burned us. The council offered preservation. Preservation? Cerisa gestured to his rotted form. This is torture. It is life. Valerius shrieked. I have seen 1,000 years of history. I have watched stars die. And now I will watch the rebirth. He tapped a control on his chair. A holographic screen flared to life, showing a schematic that made Lyra gasp. Project Fleshborn, Valerius said reverently. It was never abandoned. Cerisa, merely delayed. They do not just want your blood. They want to clone you. Cade stepped forward, his grip tightening on his baton. Clone her? Not one, Valerius said, grinning with toothless gums. Thousands, a legion of Cerisa, but stripped of the mind, stripped of the soul, just the biological vessel, just the conduit for the psychic energy. They will breed a hive of queens to act as heavy artillery for the Council's fleet. Cerisa stood frozen. The horror of it washed over her. They wanted to turn her body, her face, her genetic code into mass-produced weapons of war. You are the key, Valerius whispered. The original template. Without your living DNA, the clones degrade. They turn to sludge. They need the source. That is why they want you alive, Cade realized, nausea rising in his throat. They do not want to imprison you. They want to hook you up to a machine and harvest you for the next century. Cerisa's hands began to glow. The violet light was jagged, unstable. The floor tiles around her feet began to crack. You monster, she hissed. I am a survivor, Valerius yelled. And you are the mother of the new age. The elevator doors behind them chimed. Cade spun around. Not the service elevator. The main lift. It is a trap, Lyra shouted, diving behind a sofa. The doors slid open, and the room was instantly filled with the whining screech of plasma fire. A squad of Council Black Ops soldiers poured into the room. They wore sleek, white armor and carried suppression rifles. They didn't shout warnings. They just fired. Cade flipped a heavy marble table, dragging Cerisa down behind it just as the air where her head had been was superheated into ozone. Suppression fire, Cade yelled. Lyra, get the window. Lyra popped up, firing her scattergun. The wide spread of pellets took down the lead soldier, shattering his visor. But there were too many of them. Cerisa, Cade shouted over the roar of the blasters. We need an exit. Cerisa looked at Valerius. The old traitor was cackling in his chair, shielding himself with a kinetic field generator. She looked at the window. It was reinforced transparasteel, thick enough to stop a missile. Hold on, Cerisa screamed. She slammed her palms against the floor, though she didn't aim for the soldiers. She aimed for the structure of the building itself. She screamed, a sound of pure, ancient rage. The violet aura exploded outward, not as a wave, but as a spike. The structural supports of the penthouse floor groaned. The steel beams inside the walls warped. The massive pane of glass overlooking the city didn't shatter. It liquefied. The entire wall simply melted away, exposing them to the howling wind of the upper atmosphere. Jump! Cerisa commanded. Are you insane? Cade yelled. It is a 2,000-foot drop. Trust me. Lyra was pinned down, taking fire. A plasma bolt clipped her shoulder, spinning her around. She fell, clutching her stomach. Lyra! Cade screamed. He scrambled toward her, grabbing her by the harness of her vest. Cerisa was there in an instant, grabbing Lyra's other arm. Together, they threw themselves out of the hole in the building. They fell into the smog. The wind roared in Cade's ears. He saw the lights of the city spinning dizzyingly below them. This is it, he thought. This is how I die. Then, he felt the tug. Cerisa was not falling. She was flying. She had wrapped one arm around Cade's waist and the other around Lyra. Her body was glowing so brightly it was blinding. She wasn't using a ship. She was using herself. She was manipulating the gravity around them, creating a bubble of localized force. It was heavy, brutal work. Cade could see the strain on her face, the veins in her neck bulging. She was carrying the weight of 3 people against the gravity of a planet. They didn't soar. They plummeted, but controlled. A controlled crash. Cerisa steered them toward a landing pad 3 levels down, where their stolen hauler was idling on autopilot. Lyra had called it remotely before the breach. They hit the metal deck of the pad hard. Cerisa collapsed instantly, the light fading from her skin. Cade rolled, absorbing the impact, but he kept his grip on Lyra. Lyra was not moving. Cade looked down. His hands were wet, sticky. Oh no, Cade whispered. No. 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 Lyra had taken a second hit, a plasma bolt to the gut. The wound was cauterized at the edges, but the internal damage was massive. She was gray, her lips blue. Get her on the ship. Cerisa gasped, crawling to her feet. They dragged Lyra up the ramp just as the Black Ops team appeared on the balcony above, firing down at them. Cade punched the door seal and sprinted to the cockpit, slamming the throttle forward. The hauler shot away into the traffic, weaving through the smog, leaving the trade spire behind. In the cargo hold, the silence was worse than the gunfire. Lyra lay on a medical gurney. Cade had ripped open the medkit, but he knew, looking at the wound, that the bandages and coagulant spray were useless. Her liver was cooked. Her vitals were dropping by the second. She is fading, Cade said, his voice breaking. He held Lyra's cold hand. She is dying. Cerisa. Cerisa stood over them. She looked exhausted. The flight had drained her. Her skin was dull, her eyes dim. There is no hospital that can fix this, Cerisa said softly. Not in time. Cade looked up at her, tears stinging his eyes. She helped us. She is only here because of me. Cerisa looked at Lyra, then at Cade. She saw the agony in his face. She saw the scars he carried, and the new one that would leave if Lyra died. Move, Cerisa said. What? Move, Cade. Cerisa pushed him gently aside. She placed her hands over Lyra's wound. She did not activate a healing trance. She did not close her eyes. She stared intensely at the damaged flesh. This is forbidden, Cerisa whispered. The law of Lissari says we cannot give what is not ours. We cannot extend a life by shortening another. What does that mean? Cade asked, panic rising. Cerisa, what are you doing? Equilibrium, she said. She took a deep breath. And then she poured herself into Lyra. It was not the violent, violet energy of her telekinesis. This was white, pure, blinding white. It flowed from Cerisa's hands like thick smoke, sinking into Lyra's chest. Cade watched, awed and terrified. As the light flowed into Lyra, the wound began to knit. The burnt flesh regenerated. The color returned to Lyra's cheeks. Her breathing deepened, hitching from a death rattle to a steady rhythm. But as Lyra healed, Cerisa changed. Cade saw it happen. The skin on Cerisa's hands grew thin. The vibrant, youthful curve of her face sharpened, looking suddenly gaunt. Her hair, which had been a lustrous liquid silver, lost its sheen, turning a matte, brittle gray at the temples. She wasn't just healing Lyra, she was giving Lyra her time. Cerisa, Cade shouted. Oh no, stop. You are hurting yourself. Cerisa did not stop. She held the connection until Lyra gasped, her eyes fluttering open. Then Cerisa collapsed. Cade caught her. She felt lighter, frailer. She looked up at him. The violet in her eyes was pale, washed out. She lives, Cerisa whispered. Cade pulled her into his arms, rocking her. You idiot. You beautiful, stupid idiot. What did you do? I paid the cost, she murmured, closing her eyes. It is just time, Cade. I have too much of it anyway. Lyra was sedated, sleeping peacefully in the med bay. The ship was drifting in the nebula of a remote system, hidden from scanners. Cade found Cerisa in the cockpit. She was staring at her reflection in the dark glass of the viewport. She looked older. Not old. She was still breathtaking. But the eternal frozen youth of the statue was gone. She looked like a woman who had lived. She looked mortal. She turned when he entered. I do not know what I am anymore, she said, her voice trembling. Cade walked to her. You are Cerisa. No, she said, shaking her head. Tears spilled over. I was a princess. Then I was a statue. Then a weapon. Now, I am a battery. I am a spare parts bin for the council. And I am something that kills and breaks laws of nature. She looked at her hands. I warped steel. I crushed men. And I just traded years of my life to cheat death. I am a monster, Cade. That is what Valeria said. That is what the news says. Maybe they are right. Cade took her hands. They were still warm, but the burning heat was gone. Valerius was a traitor, Cade said firmly. And the council? They are fascists in fancy robes. You are not a monster. Cerisa, you are the woman who saved my friend. He pulled her into him. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing. It was the first time she had truly cried since waking up. The tears of 1,000 years of repression broke the dam. I am scared, she wept. I am so scared. I know, Cade whispered, stroking her hair, feeling the new coarseness of the gray strands. I am too. But we are not done. We know the truth now. We know about Project Fleshborn. They will never let us speak, Cerisa said into his shirt. Then we make them listen, Cade said. We stop running. We go to the source. Where? The Galactic Summit, Cade said. It starts in 2 days at the Celestial Station in Sector 7. All the delegates will be there. The press, the ambassadors from the fringe worlds. It is a fortress, Cerisa said, pulling back to look at him. And we have a ghost ship, Cade said. And we have Lyra, who can hack anything. And we have you. He kissed her forehead. You are not a weapon, Cerisa, but you are dangerous. Let us show them exactly how dangerous the truth is. The Celestial Station of Sector 7 was a jewel of engineering, a rotating torus of glass and chrome orbiting a binary star. Inside, the great hall was filled with the chatter of 1,000 diplomats, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the drone of polite political lies. Security was tight, but security scanners were looking for metal, for explosives, for known biosignatures. They weren't looking for a pair of lowly xenon silk traders from the outer rim. Cade wore a heavy merchant's robe, his face obscured by a breather mask common among the dust traders. Cerisa walked beside him. She wore a veil of shimmering mesh that covered her hair and face, hiding her identity and the faint glow of her skin. They moved through the crowd, carrying a crate of samples. Lyra, Cade whispered into his comms bead. Are you in? I am in the station's core, Lyra's voice came back, weak but steady. She was back on the ship, hooked into the long-range transmitter. I have looped the security feeds. You have 3 minutes before the algorithm realizes the bioscans do not match your IDs. We are at the podium, Cade said. The High Counselor, a bloated man named Draven, was speaking on the raised stage. Peace and stability. Draven droned. The rumors of unrest are unfounded. The Council remains the guardian of all sentient life. Cade and Cerisa stepped onto the stage. The crowd murmured. Security droids pivoted. Excuse me, Cade said, his voice amplified by the microphone he snatched from the podium. He ripped off his mask. I think you forgot to mention the part about the breeding program. Draven froze. Who are you? Seize him. Cerisa stepped forward. She reached up and pulled off her veil. The hall went silent, every camera, every eye fixed on her. She was undeniable. The violet eyes, the silver hair, now streaked with the gray of her sacrifice, the sheer presence of her. I am Cerisa Vera of the Lycery, she announced. Her voice did not need the microphone. She projected it with her mind, sending it ringing into the skulls of every being in the room. I am the history you tried to bury, she said, and I am the evidence of your crimes. Lyra hit the switch. Behind Cerisa, the massive holographic banner of the Council flickered and died. Replacing it was the data from the temple, the schematics of Project Fleshborn, the video of Valerius confessing. The orders were signed by the subcommittee on xenostability to harvest Cerisa's blood. The crowd erupted. Diplomats screamed. Cameras flashed. "The Council," Cerisa continued, pointing a finger at Draven, "has been stealing the biology of my people to create weapons. They seek to enslave your worlds, not protect them. They want to birth a legion of monsters to keep you in line." Draven was purple with rage. "Kill them! Cut the feed!" But the feed was not just in the hall. Lyra had bounced it off the station's relay. It was broadcasting to every colony, every outpost, every data pad in the sector. Billions of people were watching. Security guards rushed the stage. Cerisa raised her hand. She did not kill them. She simply created a wall of compressed air, pushing them back gently but firmly. "We are not your enemies," she shouted to the cameras, "but we will not be your subjects." Cade grabbed her hand. "We made the point. Time to go." They ran. The escape was a blur of blaster fire and desperate sprinting. They stole a diplomatic shuttle, blowing the docking clamps before the station's defense turrets could lock on. They jumped to hyperspace seconds before the Council cruisers opened fire. Back on the hauler, the mood was electric, terrifying. They watched the news feeds. It was chaos. Riots on 3 major worlds. The fringe colonies were recalling their ambassadors. The hashtag Project Fleshborn was trending across the galaxy. But there was another face on the screen. Cerisa's terrorist attack at Summit. The headline screamed, "Rogue alien princess declared enemy of the state, dead or alive." "They labeled you a terrorist," Cade said, watching the screen. Cerisa sat in the pilot's chair, staring at the stars. "Better a terrorist than a battery," she said quietly. She looked at Cade. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "We started a war." "Cade," she whispered. "No," Cade said, standing beside her. "We just showed everyone that the war was already happening." That night, they slept in the cramped bunk of the hauler, clinging to each other as the ship hurtled through the void. The intimacy of the previous night had opened a door in Cade's mind. He realized it as soon as he drifted off. He was not dreaming his own dreams. He was in hers. He stood on a platform of black crystal. The sky was burning. Ash fell like snow. Cerisa stood in front of him. She was wearing armor made of living diamond. She looked magnificent and terrifying. Behind her, a massive machine pulsed, the Council's weapon, a cannon designed to turn flesh back into stone. Cade tried to move, but his feet were stuck. He tried to scream, but he had no voice. Cerisa looked back at him. Her eyes were sad, infinitely sad. "I cannot let them take you," she whispered. She turned toward the weapon. She opened her arms. She stepped into the beam. She didn't just turn to stone. She shattered. She exploded into a million fragments of violet dust, destroying the machine, destroying the Council, destroying herself. Cade screamed. He woke up gasping, his heart hammering against his ribs. Cerisa woke at the same instant. She sat bolt upright, her chest heaving, sweat glistening on her skin. She looked at Cade. She knew he had seen it. She could feel the echo of his terror in her own mind. "Cerisa," Cade whispered, reaching for her. "It was just a dream." Cerisa pulled away. She scrambled out of the bunk, wrapping a sheet around herself. She backed into the corner of the small room, her eyes wide with panic. It was not a dream. She choked out, "It was a premonition. The Lissari. We see the end before it happens." She looked at him, and the love in her eyes was mixed with a crushing, final goodbye. "I am going to die, Cade. I am going to die to save you." "No," Cade said. Getting up. We change it. We make a different choice. Cerisa shook her head. She refused to speak. She turned away, curling into herself, crying silently in the dark. She walked off her mind, breaking the link, leaving Cade alone in the room, shivering with the cold certainty that he had just watched the woman he loved attend her own funeral. The warning lights on the console were not flashing. They were burning a steady crimson hole in the darkness of the cockpit. The hauler groaned, a sound like a dying beast, as the superstructure twisted under the immense gravitational shear of the red giant star looming in the viewport. "We have lost main thrusters," Lyra shouted from the engineering station. Her voice strained over the roar of the venting atmosphere. The fuel lines were not just cut, they were purged. "It is a logic bomb in the nav computer. Someone uploaded it at the summit." "Sabotage," Cade spat, wrestling with the yoke that was fighting him like a live thing. "We are caught in the gravity well. Heat shields are at 40% and dropping." Cerisa stood behind him. She was not looking at the star. She was looking at the readout of the escape pods. "There is only one pod functional," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "The logic bomb locked the others." Cade ignored her. "I can skip us off the atmosphere. I just need to angle the deflectors manually. Lyra, reroute the auxiliary power to the forward stabilizers." "Cade," Cerisa said, louder this time, "the ship will not hold. The hull temperature is critical. We are not dying here." "Cerisa," Cade yelled, sweat stinging his eyes. The heat in the cockpit was stifling, rising by the second as they dipped closer to the churning surface of the dying star. Cerisa moved. She did not go to her seat. She lunged for Cade, grabbing his shoulders with bruised strength. She ripped him out of the pilot's chair. "Hey!" Cade shouted, stumbling back. Cerisa threw him toward the airlock of the single functional escape pod. "Get in," she commanded. "Are you crazy?" Cade scrambled to regain his balance. "I am not leaving you." "You have no choice," Cerisa said. Her eyes were glowing, but it was erratic, flickering like a failing light bulb. "I can hold the ship together with my mind long enough for you to launch. I cannot hold it for both of us. The mass is too great." She raised her hand, and a wall of kinetic force slammed Cade backward into the open pod. He hit the rear padding hard, the breath knocked out of him. "Cerisa!" "No!" he gasped, struggling against the invisible pressure pinning him down. Cerisa stood at the airlock door, her hand hovering over the seal control. Tears streamed down her face, evaporating instantly in the searing heat of the failing ship. "I saw the dream." "Cade," she whispered, "I die so you live. That is the trade." Cade fought the pressure. He gritted his teeth, his veins bulging in his neck. He thought of the statue in the desert. He thought of the night in the smuggler's moon. He thought of the way she looked at the stars. "No," he growled. He didn't use strength. He used the only thing he had left, pure, stubborn refusal. He threw himself forward, fighting the kinetic wall. It was like pushing through solid concrete. But he moved, inch by agonizing inch. "You do not get to decide for me," Cade roared. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. The contact broke her concentration. The kinetic wall vanished. Cade tumbled out of the pod, tackling her to the metal deck. They sprawled together on the floor as the ship bucked violently. "You woke me up," Cade screamed, pinning her arms to the floor. "You pulled me out of the dust. You do not get to leave now. You do not get to be the martyr." Cerisa stared up at him, sobbing. "Cade, please, we go together," Cade said, shaking her. "Or we burn together. Pick one." Cerisa looked into his eyes. She saw the madness there, the absolute unwillingness to survive without her. "Together," she whispered. She closed her eyes. The violet light under her skin flared, blindingly bright. She did not push Cade away. She pushed the ship. She reached out with her mind and wrapped the entire hull in a cocoon of telekinetic force. She screamed, the sound tearing from her throat as she fought the gravity of a star. Cade scrambled back to the pilot's chair. He didn't look back. He slammed the throttle forward. The ship shuddered, the metal screeching in protest. Then, with a lurch that threw them both against their restraints, they broke the gravity well. They shot away from the red giant, trailing smoke and debris, hurtling into the dense asteroid field that orbited the dying star. "There!" Lyra shouted. "Signal beacon, Sector 49. It is an abandoned mining rig. Get us on the deck," Cade ordered. They crashed more than landed. The hauler clipped a communications tower and skidded across the rusted landing pad of the mining facility, sparks showering like fireworks in the vacuum. The ship slammed into a retaining wall and died. Silence returned. Cade sat in the pilot's chair, his hands shaking so hard he couldn't unbuckle his harness. He looked back. Cerisa was slumped on the floor, unconscious. The mining facility was a tomb of cold metal and flickering emergency lights. It had been abandoned for 50 years, stripped of anything valuable, leaving only the ghosts of the miners who had once worked the asteroid belt. They set up a perimeter in the old command center. The life support was barely functional, pumping stale, recycled air into the room. Cerisa slept for 12 hours. When she woke, she was weak, eating 3 ration bars in silence. She wouldn't look at Cade. Lyra was at the comm station, trying to splice together a signal booster from the wreckage of the hauler's array. "We are getting a hail," Lyra said, her voice tense. "Narrow beam transmission, encrypted. High-level council cipher." "They found us?" Cade asked, hand going to his blaster. "No," Lyra said. "It is not a hunting party. It is a request for a parley." "Put it on screen," Cade said. The main monitor flickered to life. The image was grainy, distorted by the magnetic interference of the asteroid field. A man sat at a desk in a darkened room. He wore the gray robes of a council bureaucrat, but his face was lined with exhaustion. "I am Counselor Vane," the man said. "I assume I am speaking to Cade Rowan and Lady Cerisa." "You assume correctly," Cade said, stepping into the light. "You have 10 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't disconnect this feed." "Because I am the one who sabotaged your ship," Vane said calmly. Cade froze. "You tried to kill us." "I tried to force you to land," Vane corrected. "If I wanted you dead, I would have detonated the reactor. I needed you stationary. I needed you hidden. And I needed to talk to you without the rest of the council listening." "Talk," Cerisa said, stepping up beside Cade. Her voice was raspy but steel-hard. Vane looked at her. He did not look with fear, but with a strange mix of pity and reverence. "The summit was a disaster," Vane said. "You exposed the Fleshborn project. The galaxy is in chaos. Half the fleet has mutinied. The other half is preparing to glass the fringe worlds to contain the rebellion." "And whose fault is that?" Cade snapped. "Mine," Vane admitted. "Ours. We thought we could control history. We were wrong. But there is something you do not know. Something Valerius did not tell you because he did not know it himself." Vane leaned forward. "The prophecy of the last queen. I know the prophecy," Cerisa said. "I was raised on it. The queen shall wake and break the chains." "That is the children's version," Vane said. "The full text was sealed in the archives of the First Era. I have read it." He paused. "The last queen shall rise from stone. She shall carry the blood of the stars, and she must bear an heir of free will, or she must be unmade. For if she remains barren of spirit, she will become the void that swallows the light." Cerisa went pale. "The council fears you," Vane continued. But not just because of your telekinesis. They fear what you become if you do not anchor yourself. The biology of the Lissari queens is unstable. Without a biological legacy, without a child born of choice, not engineering, your power will consume you. You will go mad. You will become the weapon they want, whether you choose to or not. That is a lie, Cerisa whispered. Is it? Vane asked. Do you not feel it? Hunger? The rage? The way your power is growing faster than you can control it? You warped the steel of a skyscraper. You pushed a starship against gravity. How long before you crack a planet just because you are angry? Silence hung heavy in the room. Cade looked at Cerisa. He had seen the fear in her eyes when she used her power. He had seen the gray streaks in her hair. What are you offering? Cade asked quietly. Protection, Vane said. I have a safe house in the uncharted territories of the nebula. I can hide you. I can give you time to fulfill the prophecy, to find a way to stabilize her biology. And if we refuse, then the Council will not stop, Vane said. They have authorized the deployment of the World Eater-class dreadnoughts. They will burn every asteroid in that belt to ash just to make sure you are destroyed. You have 1 hour to send your coordinates on this frequency. Vane out. The screen went black. Cade walked out of the command center, down the dark corridor toward the airlock. He needed to breathe. He needed to think. The prophecy. An air of free will. It was sickening. It was medieval. But it also made a terrifying kind of scientific sense. Cerisa was a biological reactor running without a regulator. He stopped at the viewport, looking out at the jagged rocks floating in the void. The red giant burned in the distance, a baleful eye watching them. Cade realized the truth then. It hit him harder than the gravity well. He was the danger. As long as he was with her, she was a target. The Council would hunt her to get to him, or hunt him to get to her. And worse, his presence, his love. Was it pushing her toward stability, or was it just a distraction? She must bear an heir. Cade looked at his reflection in the glass. He was a dirt digger, nobody. He couldn't protect her from dreadnoughts. He couldn't stop a prophecy. If he left, if he took the escape pod and drew the Council's fire, maybe she could slip away. Maybe she could find this Vane on her own. Maybe she could find someone worthy of her and someone who could save her. He heard footsteps behind him. Soft. Bare feet on cold metal. Cade? Cerisa's voice echoed in the corridor, and he didn't turn around. Go back to Lyra. Cerisa. We need to prep the coordinates. You are thinking about leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. Cade closed his eyes. It is the only play. Cerisa, Vane is right. You are a walking nuke, and I am just the guy holding the detonator. He turned to face her. She stood in the shadows, her arms wrapped around herself. You heard him? Cade said, his voice shaking. You need an heir. You need a dynasty. You need something I can't give you. I am just a guy who kissed a statue because he was drunk. I am not a king. Cerisa walked toward him. Her face was unreadable. You think you are protecting me? She asked. I am trying to save your life, Cade yelled. If I stay, they will use me against you and they will kill me to break you, or worse. I will watch you turn into this void. I can't do that. He stepped toward the airlock. I am taking the pod. I am going to lead them away. You wait for Vane's extraction team. Cade reached for the control panel. Cerisa moved faster than thought. She grabbed his wrist, spinning him around. Smack. The sound of her hand hitting his face echoed like a gunshot in the corridor. Cade stumbled back, stunned. His cheek burned. He looked at her. Cerisa was shaking. Her eyes were blazing with furious golden light. "You coward," she hissed. She shoved him against the wall. "You think this is about biology? You think this is about breeding?" She slammed her hand against the wall next to his head, denting the metal. "You think I waited 1,000 years in the dark to be told by a bureaucrat and a self-pitying archaeologist what my body is for? Cerisa?" "Shut up," she screamed. She grabbed the collar of his jacket and yanked him close. "Free will. Cade. That is the prophecy. Not an heir of blood, an heir of choice." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, glowing like liquid diamonds. "For 10 centuries, men have told me what I am. My father, my sister, the council, Valerius, Vane. They all see a weapon, they all see a womb, they all see a tool." She looked into his eyes, searching them desperately. "You are the only one who saw a woman," she whispered. "You are the only one who asked me what I wanted." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "I do not want a dynasty, Cade. I do not want to be a queen. I want to be the person who chooses who she loves. That is the anchor. That is the stability. It is not a child. It is love." She pulled back slightly, her hand cupping his stinging cheek. "Don't make me choose between being a woman and being a weapon, Cade, because if you leave, if you walk out that airlock, I will burn this galaxy down. I will become the void, because there will be nothing left in it worth saving." Cade looked at her. He saw the terror behind the rage. He saw the absolute terrifying weight of her devotion. He realized he had been an idiot. He was trying to be a hero in a story that didn't need one. It needed a partner. He reached up and covered her hand with his. "I am sorry," he whispered. Cerisa didn't answer with words. She kissed him. It was a kiss of desperate claim. It tasted of salt and ozone. It was a promise and a threat. She pressed her body against his, and he felt the hum of her power, not chaotic and sharp like before, but steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat syncing with his own. "You are my free will," she whispered against his mouth. "You are my choice." Cade wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight enough to bruise. "I am not going anywhere, I promise." The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Cade! Cerisa!" Lyra's voice screamed. "Proximity alert! Multiple contacts, they are here!" The facility shuddered. A massive explosion rocked the foundations, throwing them both to the floor. The lights died, replaced by the rotating red of the emergency strobes. "They found us!" Cade groaned, helping Cerisa up. Vane lied, Cerisa said, her eyes narrowing. "Or he was used. It doesn't matter." She looked at Cade. No more hiding. They sprinted back to the command center. Lyra was frantically packing the data drives. 3 cruisers, Lyra shouted, and a heavy dreadnought. "They are shelling the asteroid. The structural integrity is failing. We have 2 minutes before this rock breaks apart." "The ship is dead," Cade said. "We can't fly out of here. We do not need to fly," Cerisa said. She walked to the main console. She placed her hands on the interface. "Lyra, rerouted the facility's reactor power to the mining laser array," Cerisa commanded. "The mining lasers?" Lyra blinked. "Those are for cutting rock. They won't scratch a dreadnought's shields." "Do it!" Cerisa shouted. Lyra hammered the keys. Power rerouted. Cerisa closed her eyes. She reached out with her mind, connecting not to the ship, but to the station itself. She felt the hum of the reactor. She felt the massive industrial lenses of the mining lasers mounted on the facility's exterior. Cade watched her. He saw the change. She wasn't struggling anymore. She wasn't afraid of her power. She was channeling it. She opened her eyes. They were pure white. "Fire," she whispered. Outside, The mining lasers swiveled. They didn't fire a continuous beam. Under Cerisa's influence, the energy was compressed, twisted, and amplified by her own biofield. 3 beams of violet-white energy shot out into the void. They didn't hit the ships. They hit the asteroid field around the ships. The lasers superheated the rock. The asteroids didn't just melt. They exploded into clouds of molten plasma and shrapnel. The shockwave caught the Council cruisers off guard. Shields flared and collapsed. One cruiser was sheared in half by a massive shard of superheated rock. The dreadnought fired its main cannon. A beam of green death hammered the mining facility. The ceiling of the command center collapsed. Move! Cade tackled Lyra and Cerisa, shoving them under the heavy Durasteel console. Debris rained down around them. The air was sucked out as a breach opened in the wall. Cade grabbed an emergency rebreather mask and shoved it onto Lyra's face. He grabbed another for Cerisa to put it on. He yelled over the roar of the escaping atmosphere. Cerisa pushed his hand away. She stood up amidst the falling ruin of the base. She looked at the dreadnought looming through the hole in the wall. She raised both hands. She didn't push. She pulled. She grabbed the wreckage of the cruiser that had been destroyed. She grabbed the thousands of tons of floating debris, and she pulled it all together, forming a massive shield of scrap metal and rock between them and the dreadnought. "Go to the hauler," she commanded, her voice echoing in Cade's skull. "But it can't fly." "It will fly," she said. "Because I say it will." They dragged Lyra through the collapsing corridors. They reached the landing pad. The hauler was battered, covered in dust, leaks springing from every seal. They threw themselves inside. Cade strapped into the pilot's seat. Cerisa stood behind him. She placed her hands on his shoulders. "Drive," she said. Cade hit the ignition. The engines coughed. Cerisa squeezed his shoulders. Her energy flowed into him and through him, into the ship. It was a surge of pure adrenaline and power. The engines roared with a scream that defied physics. The hauler shot off the pad, diving straight down into the asteroid field. Behind them, the mining facility detonated as the dreadnought's second volley hit. The explosion was blinding, a miniature sun flaring in the darkness. They weaved through the rocks, faster than any human could pilot, guided by Cerisa's precognition. Left. Right. Dive. Climb. They punched through the edge of the belt and into the open void. "Jump," Cerisa whispered. "The hyperdrive is offline," Cade yelled. "Jump." Cade slammed the lever. The ship didn't enter hyperspace. It entered something else, a tunnel of violet light, torn open by Cerisa's will. They vanished from the normal universe, leaving the Council fleet firing at ghosts. They dropped out of the slipstream hours later, in the quiet dark of deep space, far beyond the Council's charts. The ship was silent. The only sound was the cooling of the engines and Lyra's ragged breathing from the back. Cade unbuckled and turned around. Cerisa had collapsed into the co-pilot's chair. She was pale, her skin almost translucent, but she was breathing. She was alive. She opened her eyes and looked at him. There was no fear left in them, only a terrifying, crystalline clarity. "We are alive," Cade breathed. "Yes," Cerisa said. She stood up, shaky but determined. She walked to the viewport and looked out at the unfamiliar stars. "No more running." "Cade," she said. She turned to face him. Vane was right about one thing. The prophecy ends in blood, but it will not be my blood, and it will not be yours. She clenched her fist. "I am done being the victim. I am done hiding in asteroids. If they want a queen, I will give them a queen. But I will not rule from a throne. I will rule from the front line." She walked over to Cade and took his hand. She placed it on her stomach. "We finish this," she said. We went to the Citadel. We go to the heart of the council, and we tear it out. Cade felt the warmth of her skin through his shirt. He felt the steady, powerful beat of her life. He realized she wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for the future. "I am with you," Cade said. "All the way." Sarisa smiled. It was not a gentle smile. It was the smile of a storm that had finally decided where to strike. "Good," she said. "Then set a course for the core worlds. We have an empire to end." The jump to the core system was not silent. It was a tear in the fabric of space, a violent, screaming arrival that shattered the calm of the Galactic Council's sanctuary. One moment, the space above the capital world of Ethelgard was empty, patrolled only by the sleek white and gold destroyers of the High Guard. The next, the void was filled with rust and iron. The rebel fleet dropped out of hyperspace. It was a mosaic of desperation, salvaged mining haulers welded with military-grade cannons, stolen frigates painted with the symbols of the Outer Rim, and swarms of single-pilot fighters that looked more like debris than ships. And leading them, shining like a jagged diamond in the rough, was the battered hauler Cade and Sarisa had flown across half the galaxy. On the bridge, Sarisa stood with her hands pressed against the viewport. She was not wearing the flight suit anymore. She wore a robe woven from the optical fibers Lyra had scavenged, a garment that shimmered and shifted color with her mood. Currently, it was the color of a bruising storm. "They are hailing us," Lyra shouted from the comm station. "It is High Counselor Draven. He is demanding our immediate surrender." "Let him speak to the void," Sarisa said. "Open the channel." But not to him. To everyone. Lyra hesitated, her fingers hovering over the console. "Everyone? You mean the fleet?" "No," Sarisa said, turning to face the crew. "The planet, the system, every mind that can hear." She closed her eyes. The bridge lights dimmed as the energy was sucked toward her. The violet bioluminescence of her skin flared, illuminating the scars on Cade's face as he stood by the pilot's chair. "Do it," Cade said. Sarisa threw her head back. She did not speak into a microphone. She screamed into the psychic ether. It was not a sound. It was a memory. Down on the surface of Ethelgard, inside the gleaming spires of the Citadel, billions of citizens stopped. In the streets, in the cafes, in the high-orbit stations, people dropped their coffees and data pads. They clutched their heads as a voice, ancient, regal, and undeniable, filled their minds. "I am Sarisa Vera," the voice resonated, carrying with it the scent of ozone and the cold of deep space. "I am the history you were told to forget." Images flooded the collective consciousness of the system. They saw the ancient Lissari temples. They saw the first council founders shaking hands with warlords. They saw the blueprints of Project Fleshborn, the plans to turn living women into breeding factories for weapons. They saw the truth of the peace they enjoyed, a peace built on the quiet genocide of bloodlines. "Look at your leaders," Sarisa commanded. "Look at what they buy with your obedience." On the bridge of the council flagship, Admiral Krell screamed orders that went unheard. His crew was staring blankly at their screens, weeping as they felt the phantom pain of 1,000 years of imprisonment. The chaos was absolute. "Cade, now is the time," Sarisa said, opening her eyes. She looked drained, but her gaze was fierce. "I will hold their attention. I will break their fleets. You get the journal." Cade nodded, checking the charge on his blaster. He hated leaving her. Every instinct in his body screamed to stay, to guard her back. But they needed the physical proof. The broadcast was a weapon of emotion. They needed a weapon of law. Silas Rowan's journal, the original log of the man who had imprisoned her, was locked in the Chancellor's private vault. It was the smoking gun that would strip the Council of its legitimacy forever. "Come back to me," Cerisa whispered, grabbing his hand. "Always," Cade said. He kissed her knuckles, then turned and ran for the shuttle bay. The space battle was a slaughter, but not the kind the Council expected. The rebel ships were outgunned, but they were fighting with the fury of the liberated, and they had a queen. Cerisa sat in the captain's chair of the hauler, her mind extended across the vacuum. She did not fire turrets. She moved the board. When a squadron of Council fighters dove to bomb the rebel flagship, Cerisa twisted her hand. A localized gravity well formed in their path. The fighters slammed into each other, crumpling like tin cans. When a destroyer lined up a kill shot on a medical frigate, Cerisa shoved the massive ship off course, its lasers carving a harmless scar across the hull of a nearby moon. She was a conductor of destruction, orchestrating the chaos to protect her people. But every move cost her. Cade could feel it through their bond, a dull, throbbing ache in the back of his skull. She was burning through her life force, pouring her soul into the void to keep the rebels alive. Cade's insertion pod punched through the atmospheric shielding of the Citadel. It was a rough ride. The anti-air batteries were distracted by the fleet above, but the turbulence was brutal. He crashed into the manicured gardens of the Chancellor's wing, the pod plowing a furrow through rare, genetically modified orchids. Cade kicked the hatch open and rolled out, blaster raised. The garden was silent. The broadcast had done its work. The guards were in disarray, their comms jammed with Cerisa's psychic truth. He sprinted toward the obsidian doors of the private archives. He clamped a breaching charge to the lock. 3, 2, 1. The explosion blew the doors inward. Cade moved through the smoke, stepping over the debris. The archives were vast, a mausoleum of physical media in a digital world. Rows of books, data crystals, and artifacts lined the walls. Cade scanned the shelves. He knew where to look. Lyra had pulled the schematics. Section 0, the trophy room. He found it in a glass case in the center of the room, a leather-bound book, cracked with age. Log of Admiral Silas Rowan, year 230 of the Federation. Cade smashed the glass with the butt of his blaster. He grabbed the book. His hands shook as he opened it. There, in fading ink, was the confession. "We have sealed the creature. The deal is done. Her biology is secured for the future initiative. God forgive us, but peace requires monsters." "I got it," Cade whispered into his comms. "Cerisa, I have the book. Static." "Cerisa?" Cade tapped his earpiece. "Cade," a voice said. But it was not Cerisa. It was cool, cultured, and dripping with malice. "Mr. Rowan," High Counselor Draven said. "I must thank you. We were having trouble pinpointing the exact frequency of the rebel command ship, but your little burst of excitement just lit it up for our targeting computers." Cade's blood ran cold. "And as for you," Draven continued, "you are trespassing." The lights in the archive snapped on. Blindingly bright, Cade spun around. Draven stood at the entrance, flanked by 6 members of the Praetorian Guard. They were huge, encased in black power armor that hummed with active shielding. "Drop the book," Draven said, holding a disruptor pistol, "or I melt the flesh from your bones." Cade calculated the odds. 6 armored giants. 1 archaeologist with a mining blaster. He didn't drop the book. He shoved it into his jacket. "Go to hell," Cade said. Draven sighed. "Kill him. But leave the head. I want the girl to see it." The guards raised their rifles. On the bridge of the hauler, Cerisa screamed. It was not a broadcast. It was a personal, agonized cry that shattered the viewports of the ship. She felt Cade's fear. She felt the cold metal of the rifles pointed at his chest. She stood up. The optical fiber robe disintegrated, unable to withstand the energy pouring off her. "Lyra!" Sarisa shouted. "Take command! Keep the fleet alive!" "Where are you going?" Lyra yelled, shielding her eyes from the blinding violet light. "To get him," Sarisa said. She walked toward the airlock. She didn't put on a suit. She didn't wait for a shuttle. She blew the outer hatch. The vacuum of space rushed in. Sarisa stepped out into the void. She did not freeze. She did not suffocate. She ignited. The moisture in the air around her froze instantly, but her biofield caught it, shaped it. The ice crystals swirled, hardening, compressing until they were harder than diamond. They formed a second skin around her, a suit of jagged, translucent armor that refracted the light of the distant sun. She looked like a vengeful star. She didn't fly. She fell with purpose. She turned herself into a kinetic meteor. She punched through the atmosphere of Ethelgard, a streak of violet fire lighting up the sky. Cade dove behind a marble pillar as the plasma bolts chewed up the floor where he had been standing. "Give it up!" "Rowan!" Draven shouted. Cade returned fire, his shots bouncing harmlessly off the Praetorian shields. He was pinned. He was dead. Then, the roof caved in. There was no explosion, just a massive concussive impact that shook the entire citadel. Dust and debris rained down. Through the hole in the ceiling, something descended. Sarisa floated down. Her crystal armor faceted the light, making her look like a creature made of prisms. Her hair floated in a halo of zero gravity. Her eyes were white voids of power. The Praetorians turned their weapons on her. She flicked a finger. The rifles were ripped from their hands. The metal weapons crumpled into balls of scrap and dropped to the floor. The guards charged her, activating their stun batons. Sarisa landed on the floor. She didn't strike them. She simply expanded her field. The shockwave threw the armored giants across the room like toys. They slammed into the walls with bone-shattering force and slid down, motionless. She turned to Draven. The High Counselor was backing away, his face pale. He fumbled with something on his belt. You abomination," Draven stammered. Sarisa walked toward him. The crystal armor crunched softly with each step. "I am not an abomination." "Draven," she said, her voice echoing from the walls. "I am the consequence." Draven pulled the device from his belt. It wasn't a gun. It was a heavy golden cylinder with a focusing lens. Cade recognized it from the schematics Lyra had stolen. It was the prototype, the petrification emitter, the device that had frozen her the first time. "Sarisa, look out!" Cade screamed. Draven laughed hysterically. "Go back to sleep, princess!" He pulled the trigger. A beam of gray, sickly energy shot from the device. It was instantaneous. It was death in the form of stasis. Sarisa was too close. She raised her hand to block it, but her shields were weakened from the space battle. Cade didn't think. He didn't calculate. He moved. He threw himself from behind the pillar. He dove in front of Sarisa. The beam hit him in the chest. "Cade!" Sarisa shrieked. The impact didn't kill him instantly. It stopped him mid-air. He slammed into the floor. The pain was absolute. It wasn't hot. It was cold. A cold so deep it burned. He felt his limbs growing heavy, stiff. He looked at his hand. The skin was turning gray, hardening, turning to quartz. Cade. Sarisa fell to her knees beside him. Her crystal armor shattered, falling away like glass. She touched his face. Her hands were shaking. "No, no, no," she sobbed. "Not you, not you." Cade looked up at her. His lungs were turning to stone. He could barely draw breath. "I told you," he rasped, his voice sounding like grinding rocks. "We go together." Draven stood over them, aiming the weapon again. How touching. Now, join him in the garden. Cerisa looked at Cade's gray face. She felt his heartbeat slowing, turning to the silence of stone. Something inside her broke. It wasn't her heart. It was the seal on her power. The fear she had carried for 1,000 years, the fear of becoming a monster, vanished. Because being a monster was the only way to save him. She looked up at Draven. "You took my life," she whispered. "You took my sister. You took my history." She stood up. The air in the room turned black. The gravity reversed. Debris began to float upward. And now, she screamed, "You take him?" She let go. She didn't use a technique. She didn't use a spell. She unleashed the raw, unadulterated energy of a dying star. The sound was not heard. It was felt, a psychic shockwave that pulverized the mind. Draven didn't even have time to scream. The emitter in his hand exploded, then the armor he wore, then the wall behind him. The entire wing of the citadel disintegrated. The roof was torn off, sucked into the vortex of her rage. The walls turned to dust. Cerisa stood in the center of the maelstrom, screaming, her body glowing so bright she was a silhouette of pure white fire. The citadel collapsed. The massive spire, the symbol of council power, groaned and fell, crashing down into the capital city below. When the dust settled, there was silence. The rebel fleet held orbit above. The council forces had surrendered, their morale shattered by the destruction of their command center. Lyra landed a shuttle in the ruins of the Chancellor's garden. She ran toward the center of the crater. There, in the middle of the destruction, was a perfect, smooth dome of violet crystal. It was solid, impenetrable. Lyra fell to her knees beside it, touching the warm surface. Inside, deep within the semi-transparent mineral, she could see two figures. Cerisa was curled around Cade. Her arms were wrapped tight around him. They were frozen, motionless. "Is she?" a rebel soldier asked, stepping up behind Lyra. Lyra wiped tears from her face. She pressed her ear to the crystal. She heard it, faint, rhythmic. Thump, 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 thump. "No," Lyra said, a smile breaking through the grime on her face. "She is just waiting for him to wake up." The war ended that day. With the council leadership dead and the truth of the Fleshborn project broadcast to every home in the galaxy, the regime crumbled. It didn't happen overnight. There were skirmishes, trials, and treaties, but the grip of the High Families was broken. The crystal cocoon remained in the ruins for 6 months. The rebels built a perimeter around it, guarding it like a shrine. Scientists came to study it, but they couldn't scratch it. Then, one morning, as the twin suns of Ethelgard rose, the crystal simply evaporated. It turned to mist and drifted away in the wind. Cade and Cerisa walked out of the fog, hand in hand. Cade walked with a limp, and his chest bore a scar that looked like a vein of gray quartz running through his skin. Cerisa's hair was white as snow, her violet eyes pale but clear. They didn't speak to the press. They didn't accept the throne the rebels offered. They got on a ship and vanished. The planet was not on any chart. It was a green world, lush and wild, located in a nebula that the old star maps listed as uninhabitable. The house was simple. It was built of wood and stone, perched on a cliff overlooking a teal ocean. Cade sat on the porch, whittling a piece of driftwood. The scar on his chest ached when the weather turned, a permanent reminder of the stone sleep. He looked older, the gray in his beard matching the quartz in his skin. The screen door creaked open. Cerisa walked out. She wore a simple linen dress, loose-fitting. She carried 2 mugs of tea. She looked different. The blinding bioluminescence was gone, replaced by a healthy human flush. Her eyes were still violet, but they no longer glowed in the dark. She was mortal now. Her power had burned itself out in that final scream, leaving just enough spark to keep her alive, but not enough to end empires. She sat beside him, handing him the tea. She rested her hand on her stomach. It was a small, barely noticeable swell, but to Cade, it was the most terrifying and beautiful thing he had ever seen. An heir of free will, he thought. Not a weapon. Just a child. He looked at her. She was watching the sunset, a content smile on her face. "You know," Cade said, leaning back in his chair, "I was thinking about that day in the desert." Cerisa raised an eyebrow, looking at him. "Which part? The part where you were drunk, or the part where you insulted a royal princess?" "The part where I made the best mistake of my life," Cade said. He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "Still glad I kissed a statue," he teased, squeezing her hand. Cerisa looked at him. She looked at the scar on his chest, then down at the life growing inside her. She thought about the 1,000 years of cold silence, and the warm, chaotic, messy year of being alive. She leaned in, her eyes sparkling with a mischief that had survived the fall of a government. She winked. "Every night," she whispered back, pressing a kiss to his cheek, "and every morning,